you can't be a successful practice unless you have a profit to back up, so you can reinvest in your people and your systems and exploring new sectors and opportunities. Having a program which blends practical experience with academic learning, it's really got to be the way forward. The pathway to being a partner is about leadership of a team delivering projects, i.e. delivering design projects.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Architecture. I'm your host, Ryan Willard, and today I'm delighted to welcome Peter Barker, a distinguished figure with over 4 decades of experience in the built environment and a particular mastery in technical design. As a founding director of BIM Academy, a visionary partnership between Ryder and Northumbria University, Peter has been at the forefront of driving digital transformation across our industry. From 2010 to 2021, he guided internal consultancy projects advising clients throughout Europe, Southeast Asia, and Australia. And in recent years, Peter has channeled his expertise into pioneering work-based learning initiatives, most notably the award-winning Plan B apprenticeship scheme, which is now flourishing in London, Manchester, Newcastle, and Vancouver. In today's episode, we will be discussing workplace learning, some of these apprenticeships like Plan B and architectural education. We look at succession planning and leadership within a large practice. We also discuss alternative pathways to becoming an architect and their advantages to employers, as well as looking at the innovations around training team members and actually having that as an alternative or an additional revenue stream that Ryder has been incredibly creative with. So sit back, relax, and enjoy Peter Barker. This episode is sponsored by Smart Practice, Business of Architecture's flagship program to help you structure your firm for freedom, fulfillment, and financial profit. If you want access for our free training on how to do this, please visit smartpracticemethod.com. Or if you want to speak directly to one of our advisors about how he might be able to help you, please follow the link in the information. We are looking for architect developer stories for the Business of Architecture podcast. So, are you an architect developer with valuable insights to share? We're always on the lookout for passionate voices in the industry to join us on the Business of Architecture podcast. If you're ready to share your journey, lessons, strategies with our global audience, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us to explore being a guest on our show and help inspire other architect developers on their path. We'd be interested in hearing your story, whether you're at the very beginning of your development story or whether you have $100 million portfolio of projects already in the bag completed. We'd like to hear from you if you're working with the developers or that you've developed a number of small houses or you're working at a larger scale. Peter, welcome to the Business of Architecture. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, pretty good. Nice to be here.
Excellent.
Looking forward to our discussion.
Very good. Good to see you. So you are one of the partners at Ryder Architecture. You have been there for nearly 30 years. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And you guys at Ryder Architecture, you have quite an extraordinary portfolio of work. You're based up in Newcastle. And perhaps we'll start by my first question was, well, what does it mean to be a partner of an architecture studio like Ryder?
Well, first point of slight correction is that our origins are in Newcastle, but we're very much a UK practice and an international practice with strong connections outside the UK as well. But we're very proud of our heritage and origins in the northeast of England. The practice has been in existence for over 70 years. It was founded by 2 modernists, Gordon Ryder and Peter Yates, who are pupils of Bertold Lubetkin, and founded essentially a multidisciplinary practice in the northeast of England back in the 1950s. And I joined the practice when the practice, I suppose, was at a bit of a crossroads. Gordon Ryder had retired and Peter Yates had sadly died a few years previous to that. And we had 2 new partners take on the business at the time, Mark Thompson and Peter Buck. And And I was working in another practice in the northeast of England where I had a very strong technical design background, and I saw an opportunity to join Peter and Mark in the growth of I suppose, a revitalized version of Ryder. And we literally had 14 or 15 people in the practice at the time. And I've worked very closely with the team here ever since to really grow the practice into what it is today, which is we have over 370 people in Newcastle, London, Glasgow, Liverpool, Manchester, Bristol, and also Vancouver, and a strong network outside the UK as well. But I think our origins in an approach to essentially an integrated approach to design, which in the early days of Ryder and Yates, as the practice was, involved engineers and architects working collaboratively under one roof on drawing boards in those days. But going back to the origins of the term architect is really about master builder and somebody who understands the various disciplinary aspects of design, not just the spatial and aesthetic side of things. So I think that ethos of being an integrated design practice has really stayed with us.
And your role, how did you become a partner at the firm? How long did that take? Was it something that you had always had in mind, or was it something that happened more organically?
I think organically is a good term. My interests growing up were very much in history and languages and humanities. I did actually ancient languages at school, Latin and Greek, and also ancient history. I was always more drawn to that side of things, I suppose. My father was an architect, and then when I was growing up, he said, "One day, do you want to be an architect?" And I said, "No, not really. I'm more interested in studying Trojan Wars and things like that." So I did a degree in classics and really enjoyed it. There's a certain thing around about studying ancient languages and the sort of construction of those ancient languages, and which is sort of in bed to sort of questioning and interrogatory type of mindset, where you're looking at how things are put together and how things are analysed and communicated. So I do think there's some tentative similarities there. But I graduated at a time when the UK was going through a pretty bad economic patch. In the very early 1980s, there was 3 million unemployed for the first time since the 1920s and 30s. And I really struggled to get a career going with a degree in an obscure humanities subject. And I ended up, my dad said, "Look, you can't just kick around and do nothing. Why don't you come and work in the office part-time to do odd jobs, I suppose?" And I ended up working at a very low level, helping with organising printing and things like that. And then I got gradually drawn into the design process. And I could have made a decision then at the age of 23, shall I embark on a completely new architectural degree and architectural qualification pathway? But to be honest, the prospect of 7 more years study before potential registration was very, very intimidating. And I took what I thought was an easier option, which was to study as an architectural technologist, which was to analyse, the technical design aspects of buildings. So I decided to do that. Ironically, I did it as a part-time subject. I learned most of what I learned in the office, very practically out on site, working with people who knew how things were put together. And I enjoyed it very much. And I basically progressed through a technical design career. I did 10 years in a different practice before I came to Ryder in 1995. So I've come at it from a slightly different route. But it's interesting, some of the work I'm doing at the moment, looking at architectural, or I suppose rationalization of architectural career pathways, is trying to solve that problem of how do we make architecture as a career more inclusive and more diverse and less expensive, because it's such an intimidating thing to do at the age of 18 or 23 or whatever it is to do 7 years of a very linear, quite complicated, slightly fragmented qualification. But so that's how I got into the and that sort of began my journey working in Ryder. And it's probably in the last 2 or 3 years, because I'm close to retirement, that I've really focused back again on how we can improve pathways into built environment careers, not only architecture but others.
Was it a struggle, or did you have advantages having come at architecture from the route that you did?
I don't think I had it any easier than anybody else, to be honest. I consciously didn't want to go down a sort of nepotistic route of, my dad's got me a job in an architect's office. It was very much starting right literally at the beginning in the print room, folding prints, paper prints.
Sure.
And I basically started again. And the guys I went to Newcastle Polytechnic, which is now Northumbria University. And in those days, polytechnics have disappeared essentially in the UK. But I was working alongside 16, 17-year-olds who were bright people, but they were 4 or 5 years younger than me. I suppose what I did have was I think the training I got through studying a languages degree and a humanities degree allowed me to start thinking very analytically about how things are put together and how things are structured in a sort of problem-solving mindset. And I've always had an interest in the history of things and buildings and objects and human.
Well, it sounds like quite a perfect education in a way, like that, having the interest in the history of things and the growth of people and how people are interacting as civilizations. That's kind of a big component of architectural a study, and actually coming from it from a very practical, in the workplace perspective. Again, it's a good way to learn the ropes, and also, from today's perspective, when we look at architectural education, I know we can talk about this in a little bit. There's a lot of criticisms about the overemphasis on just the more theoretical design aspects of architecture, which then negates either the construction science and certainly the economic realities of how architecture is practiced, or just the fact that architecture is practiced in the context of business. Like, you have to win you have to win projects, you have to work with clients, etc.
Yeah, I think architecture has unfortunately managed to sort of narrow its scope down to what is in a lot of people's minds, and some. I'm not going to name any names, but there's some probably architecture schools who feel that architecture is all about spatial organization and aesthetics, rather than design being something that actually grapples with really understanding the science of materials and construction techniques and construction methods of building, as well as the societal side of things, the economic side of things, the business side of things, the ethics side of things. All of those things are ultimately about design, and being a designer or an architect is actually synthesizing all that into a solution. And in a way, architecture thrives when it's based on, responding creatively to constraints and seeing opportunities in those constraints, as much as having, the last thing you want is a complete greenfield site with a blank piece of paper and say, it's got to respond to something.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what makes it fascinating and very exciting. Yeah.
So when you first joined Ryder in the mid-90s, you were described in there. What was your pathway to becoming a partner, and how would you describe the role of a partner in a firm, in an international firm like Ryder?
I think first of all, I'll talk about my pathway, which was essentially coming and doing what I was I suppose, recruited to do, which was really have a strong technical design knowledge with a focus on, I suppose, it's the entire design process, but the tendency to focus on sort of schematic design onwards into technical design and construction and operation. But very much seeing it as part of a whole. You know, the design is a virtuous circle of starting with a strategic briefing and a phase which takes the occupational phase and feeds that back into the next project. But my focus was very much on improving how we can take some of the conception of design or client briefs and turning that into a buildable solution. But in doing that, one thing I really valued about the practice at the time and since is that we haven't discriminated against. Some people have strengths in different parts of the workflow, if you like. But what I'd like to think everyone has, hopefully within Ryder, is a really good understanding of the entire workflow, even though they may have a particular enthusiasm or a skill in a particular part of that workflow. So my background was mainly that stage of a project life cycle, I suppose, to start with. But in my journey to that point, I'd also done a lot of work on sort of creation of, I suppose, management systems and procedural stuff to try and make people's life easier in terms of how getting consistency and quality in terms of how we deliver projects. Also often known as sort of quality management systems, which has got a bit of a bad press. But at the end of the day, those types of systems, if it's done right, can allow architects to design buildings consistently and in better quality and in a much more considered and structured way. So I had a strong grounding in that. And it was also around the time that the UK government brought in a whole set of new legislation around building safety called the Construction Design Management Regulation, CDM, which were trying to create a greater awareness amongst designers, not just awareness or almost coercion of designers to be more responsible about the safety of the buildings they design. And ironically, that's again come full circle with the in the aftermath of the Grenfell fire and the Grenfell inquiry. So I had a sort of strong involvement in the early phases of that. So those sort of, I suppose, skills together was where I sort of got my entry point into the practice and really enjoyed building that capability within the practice. But obviously working alongside my colleagues who have those strengths in those different parts of the phases. And I think I've had a strong sort of desire to communicate and lead, trying to get everyone working off the same page in terms of how we deliver projects. So that led to a sort of team leadership role. We were also doing, we've always tried to diversify the sector specialisms we have within Ryder, so we don't necessarily put all our eggs in one basket in terms of a client portfolio, because obviously economic variables out there mean that one sector may suddenly be impacted by economic changes. So we've always been pretty diverse, but we did have a lot of public sector work in the mid 2000s, involving a lot of hospitals and schools, healthcare and schools projects. So we were doing multiple public sector schools projects and I was involved in leading the delivery side of a lot of those projects, which then harnessed a lot of that, as well as organizational skill and technical design expertise. But then around this time, we saw an opportunity to really drive further productivity by the adoption of digital tools.
Right.
And Ryder had been one of the early adopters of CAD software in the 1980s. And myself and Mark Thompson, who's a managing partner at Ryder, were very, very keen to adopt an emerging platform, Revit, and obviously BIM, which was an emerging term at the time. And we worked closely with an American practice called HKS, at the time, but with them we saw an opportunity to really drive quality and productivity by the structured adoption of BIM software. So around 2008-9, we really invested a lot of time in retraining people in that platform or those platforms, and we did a number of research projects to really get ahead of the game and understanding the possibilities of BIM. And then that subsequently, by happy coincidence, the UK government got behind it around 2010, because again we were into another economic downturn, and the government that came in the UK at the time saw, I think it saw BIM as one of the silver bullets to try and solve the productivity challenges in the obviously you can't just have one silver bullet, so that hasn't necessarily had a particularly the impact it maybe could have had, although progress has been made. So so I gradually built up a range of expertise across a number of things, which ultimately have at the heart a drive towards quality, productivity, efficiency, and ultimately, driving profitability for the practice. But that isn't just about practice wanting to make lots of money, because you can't be a successful practice unless you have a profit to back up, so you can reinvest in your people and your systems and exploring new sectors and opportunities. So that's really that was sort of my route to being a partner. Part of that journey also, for about 10 years, led to a spin-out business that we created with Northumbria University called BIM Academy, which really built on that expertise we'd accrued through practical use of BIM software. And so we actually created a successful consultancy business called BIM Academy with Northumbria, which I ran for 10 years, and is now again thriving. We've done there's projects, international projects around the world. The company's rebranded recently as Ocana, which is again diversified into other fields such as building safety and sustainability, modern methods of construction. And I handed that initiative over to a colleague, Graham Kelly, 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm now been focusing, as I mentioned earlier, on looking at how we can reshape educational pathways in the built environment, which is where I'm.
Wow. So Ryder owns essentially another business, which is a purely educational business, originally starting off in BIM and CAD training, and then now has kind of expanded into other parts of the building trade or the architectural.
We have close links with Northumbria University because obviously they're based in Newcastle. They have campuses internationally as well, but so that is our home turf, as it were. So because of the close relationships with some of their academics who were specializing in this area and our practical use of the tools around 2008, 2010, we saw an opportunity to create something which was, I suppose, it's a blend of training, educational, and consultancy expertise, because we could see there was an opportunity here to there's no point in using a BIM platform in isolation. It just doesn't make sense. It's about collaboration and integration. So unless the rest of the industry rises with the same capability, we're not going to go anywhere. So I suppose we regard it as a business opportunity as well, which it ultimately was. But it's essentially BIM Academy was a blend of a training, a consultancy, and a thought leadership organization, which specialized in, I suppose, BIM and digitization for most of its life. But probably from around 2020 onwards, we've looked at bringing other expertise into that. And ultimately, that's led to the creation of a completely rebranded business, which does more than just the BIM side, which is why we've rebranded it as Ocana. But that's essentially, we had a great relationship with Northumbria University and still do. They decided to focus more on academic pursuits. So Ryder now essentially own Ocana and operate that as a parallel business, which is very complements our core architectural expertise as well.
So do you have all of your own team members trained through certain parts of Ocana, or you have very good internal training systems available?
Yeah, that's an internally a very close relationship, and obviously
Right.
it allows us to access that expertise quite readily. So that's been a really beneficial aspect of that relationship as well.
And I think both these things that you've kind of illustrated, the Akana and your own career trajectory of kind of coming at architecture from very much within the workplace, opens up the conversation about apprenticeship education and what Ryder has been doing to be one of the kind of forerunners and really be pioneers in that area of the training of the next generation of architects. Perhaps you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah. I must start by saying, there's many schools of architecture in the UK who deliver, excellent programs with excellent results and candidates graduating from those programs. But I think the ARB, the Architects Registration Board, recognised recently in the last 2 years that there needs to be a radical shift in how architectural education is delivered, because it's essentially too long, too expensive, too complicated, and there's an awful lot of inconsistency in how it's delivered. Now, it's not to say every school of architecture should be exactly the same, but there's recognised problems with it, and it's because it's expensive and it's long, it's become slightly exclusive or elitist, even if I can use that word, and it prevents those from necessarily underrepresented, underprivileged backgrounds from entering it as a profession. So that's one consideration. But from my own experience I learned so much in the period from probably when I was 23, when I started down this route, to when I was completed. But Newcastle Poly was 1987, 88. Almost everything I learned was in the workplace, on site, working alongside experienced colleagues. Probably the greatest insight I got purely from an academic side was learning about contracts and appointments and contract law and risk management, I suppose. That was really well delivered in an academic context. But everything else about design and implementation, regulation, was learned from the workplace. So having a program which blends practical experience with academic learning, it's really got to be the way forward, in my in my estimation. The other thing is that we probably around 2013, this conversation about within the UK about architectural education being at a crossroads or at a point where it needs to be rethought has been going on now for many years. But around 2013, it was I think it was our 60th anniversary as a practice at the time, because the practice was founded in 1953. We started talking to some of our built environment consultancy peers in the Northeast, and I'm talking about businesses like Arabs, Sir Robert McAlpine, Turner & Townsend, Faulkner Browns, not small organisations, but have a UK and international reach as well. And I think we all felt that we all wanted something more from from built environment education. So we decided to collaborate and design our own program, which was a blend of practical experience and academic learning, but very much based on learning in the workplace, and designing something that would allow candidates to not have to take out student loans and could learn and earn at the same time. So we developed a program which is now known as Plan B, which the reason it's called Plan B, it stands for Plan for Built Environment Education. That's the acronym. So we launched this officially back in 2016. We managed to get it off the ground. Our original aspiration was that it would lead into a degree program. We did speak to a number of universities at the time, and for whatever reason, it was difficult for them to align their funding or their structures to respond to that at the time. So it's currently run as a pre-degree level program, which is, for those familiar with UK educational structures, it's level 4 to level 5. But basically what it involves is an apprentice joining the program, normally from A levels in the UK, or T levels, which is level 3 high school, and then being employed centrally by an apprenticeship agency, which then will place the candidate or the student in 6 different work placements over 2 years. So they'll do 4 months working in a variety of businesses. It could be an architectural practice, an engineering consultancy, a contractor's office or a site, a quantity surveyor, cost management business, project management business. It could be a building services, mechanic and electrical engineering business. So it's a variety of experiences over 4 months each, paid a salary.
Wow.
And they will study 1 day a week in a college academic environment. And they will gain a huge amount of experience during that time. They will not end up with any debt as a result of the program. And once they graduate, they can then normally progress into an advanced entry into a career in architecture, engineering, construction management, cost management. And we've had over 105, I think 105 graduates from the program since we launched officially in 2016. And the program now operates in Newcastle, Manchester and London. And we're very proud of that. And as are the other founding sponsors, the likes of Arabs. And we've now got over 60 businesses in the UK supporting that program. And basically the sponsor business will pay the salary of an apprentice, and they will host an apprentice during that 2-year period in rotation. In brief, that's how the program works. And we're very keen to spread the word about that program. Through our Vancouver office, we've managed to establish an affiliated program with British Columbia Institute of Technology in Vancouver. It's not quite the same structure, but it follows the similar principles. And that's now in its 2nd year in Vancouver. So we think the model of the template works well.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
How once people have kind of gone through that process, what's the pathway to registration as a professional?
It varies depending on the subject area that they are interested in pursuing. And ironically, architecture is probably the more challenging in terms of the number of hoops they have to jump through. If I could maybe start with civil engineering or say construction management, it's normally possible for a Plan B graduate to drop into the 3rd or 4th year of a degree in those subjects, and then they'll progress into a master's and ultimately gain chartership of the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers or Institution of Civil Engineers. For architecture, those who've just done Plan B and want to do architecture normally can drop into the 2nd year of a degree, which is the sort of traditional Part 1. So they will jump ahead slightly, but they then need to do 2 years of a Part 1 and then do a Part 2. And then they'll need to do the professional practice before they can register as an architect. But they gain a huge amount of practical knowledge and a broader perspective on the built environment as a whole than those who've just done a straightforward.
Yeah, I mean that's
architecture
I can imagine that being an amazing experience, just being able to actually be inside the offices of other sorts of consultants that you might be working with, and just the practical element of it. Do you see students wanting to continue that practical part of their education when they kind of go off into the 2nd or 3rd years of their university degrees?
Yes. In a way, it's frustrating that it's very difficult if a Plan B graduate wanted to do architecture, then normally the only option they have is to do 2 years of a full-time Part 1. There is a level 6 degree apprenticeship as an architectural assistant in the UK, but only 2 universities deliver that. And that would provide a degree of continuing practical experience but it's a very rare sort of offering. So I do think there's an opportunity to continue. And again, the ARB reforms, known as the Tomorrow's Architects reforms, which were published last year, do encourage learning providers to try and design new programs which have practical outcomes throughout the duration of the program, rather than just being seen that's bolted on at the end. I mean, just on in terms of work-based learning, the other separate from Plan B but related, I suppose, is Ryder were one of the early sort of adopters of the degree apprenticeships that were introduced around 2018 in the UK, and we've been heavily supportive of the level 7 degree apprenticeship in architecture, which is essentially the master's or part 2 equivalent. And I think we've now had we've supported 18 candidates on the level 7 degree apprenticeship, and that's probably across 5 or 6 schools of architecture in the UK. Again, those who've done that have found it incredibly rewarding. Obviously, there's the advantage that they are being paid a salary while they are studying, but they are studying whilst learning either 3 days, 2 days. In some cases, some schools operate a system where it's a block release, so they will go away and do an intensive program for 2 weeks, but then go back to almost full-time work in practice between times. So each program is slightly different, but we found that, and those who have been on the program within Ryder have found it pretty beneficial, really.
What as an employer, what are some of the advantages that you see in students when they kind of finish their university education, with those students who have had workplace learning, or a very kind of large component of it as workplace learning, or even them who have been through a kind of apprenticeship scheme? What are some of the advantages you think those students have, in their careers moving forward, and what things is it very advantageous for you as employers to see students having?
I think there's a few things. I mean, there's a maturity in understanding that how multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary team working actually works in reality on projects. That sounds a bit around the houses, but just the realities of how you work with other consultants and other members of the project team and the client and our stakeholders and the communities we serve, how we work as a team. They will have gained some of that knowledge, not through all of it, through working in practice while also studying. Whereas, I would suspect that in a number of purely academic architectural programs, there's not a lot of exposure to that, and probably not a lot of exposure to working with other disciplines such as structural engineers and building services engineers and liaison with regulators, local authorities, planning departments. And that I'm not criticising, those more academically focused academic programs, but some of them do have interventions with practice, but some of them don't. Whereas an apprenticeship or a program like Plan B does really actively compel the candidate to work alongside others in a real project environment. The other advantage is a very, very practical level, understanding how to use some of the tools that we use, everything from Revit through to digital collaboration tools like Navisworks or Celebri, using things like Miro to collaborate on in design exchanges. And then, the simple practical things about maintaining records of decisions that are made and things that some people think are really boring, but are actually incredibly important to make sure a project runs smoothly and keeps you out of court if things go wrong. So everything from the tools, the practical day-to-day stuff about managing and operating a project, through to the human side of interacting with your colleagues and peers on a real project. and sort of seeing what works and what doesn't work in reality. So those are the skills that we see being acquired from an apprenticeship model.
Excellent. What about the kind of understanding of perhaps the business and commercial context? Because this is something, obviously, we speak about here on the podcast a lot, is the negation of the business context or the commercial reality that often happens in architecture school, which I feel I wouldn't necessarily want to see business education at school, but just the lack of acknowledgement that there is an economic context that exists for architecture. It means that then people unintentionally become very uninterested in it. And this has a lot of problems, certainly when we see people set up their own smaller practices and there's an aversion to anything to do with finance and money and the negotiations. How do you see that kind of being addressed in apprenticeships and the advantages of apprenticeship model?
I think the sort of sharp end of that, the apprentice will gain an insight into that at a project level by, if we manage it correctly and give them the right opportunities to be exposed to this, by understanding the financial aspects of a project. The fact that even to the point of, being invited into the fee review meeting, where they'll understand the basis of our fee, how that's been derived, how it's been planned. We will plan. If a fee isn't just based on a percentage, it's obviously a percentage is a percentage of the construction value is a consideration, but you should always really almost stress test that fee to make sure that it's achievable with the resource that you need to do the job, and plan that through. And taking an apprentice through that, this is how we arrived at the fee. This is how the fee's broken down per work stage. We've assumed that these things will happen in these work stages, therefore, and we need to, the importance of filling in your timesheet, because otherwise, how do you track how profitable you're being and whether you're making a return on that stage of the project or not? Because ultimately, all these things impact on us as a practice, because developing a profit margin which we can reinvest in our people and doing things better in the future. So I think they will learn at a project level, but we as a practice, and I know some of the practices do this as well, we also invest in internal training and awareness on how the business works as a business, and we'll run internal seminars on almost an annual or biannual cycle for everyone. So this is how the business works. We will have clients coming in to say how the financial aspects of their decision making, what informs them, making a strategic decision to build a project in the first place, to commission a building in the first place. So we've invested in a lot of internal awareness raising training, if you want to call it that, to broaden that perspective and not just see it as this project's making profit and this one's not. It's about the broader picture and even the economic side of things, like, what are the changes? What's the fallout from a UK budget have on us not just us as a business, as a sector in the built environment? But and I know many of the practice invest in that. But what I think is encouraging from the reforms that the ARB have announced, and have not just announced, they've actually imposed them, are a set of competencies for architects, which clearly, I've got them written down in front of me here, actually, as a reminder. But there's a group of competencies around management, practice, and leadership. And those things many of those things already exist in architectural programs. But there's a set of competencies around that, and really, they're looking for learning providers to really reconfigure their programs to make sure that those competencies are clearly addressed. Whether it's through academic training or practical training is sort of up to them to a degree. But, the stuff in there are also about professionalism and ethics, using processes of research and evaluation in the design process, as well as design as a topic itself. And then, just to be complete about it, also contextual and architectural knowledge as well. So it's refreshing to see there's almost a reboot of architectural education, which reminds providers that the management practice side and the leadership side of things is really important as well. And I think a lot of that skill can be acquired through an apprenticeship model.
I think it's amazing that you guys have like an internal kind of set of education, like an education program, if you like, where you're revealing parts of the business side of the of the practice to the rest of the team, and even inviting clients in on those kind of conversations. That's pretty innovative.
Yeah, we've developed a couple of other programs as well, and we've done them because we think it makes good business sense to make sure that everyone is operating at the best of their abilities, and it's, you could argue it's one of them, which I'll come on to in a second, is really attempting to fill the gaps from the educational programs that those who've joined us have joined from. We've developed a program called Technical Design Essentials, which is 25 short modules on everything from how to plan your design deliverables through to how to waterproof a basement substructure, through to the basics around fire strategy or drywall and partitioning systems. Everything you could possibly think of in terms of the planning and delivery design information through to how buildings are put together. And we've done that because we've found that some people have joined us, whilst they're talented people, have got major gaps in their basic understanding. And so we've created that with, I think, a group of 25 senior, reasonably experienced architects and technologists within the practice working together to create a program, which we've then rolled out in our own time and at our own cost. And I think there's about 120 people been on that program now within the practice. And we've found it money well spent because those people now have managed to fill those gaps. But you could argue that maybe those gaps shouldn't have been there in the first place. But we didn't mind doing it, and it's been good fun doing it, and we've enjoyed doing it as well.
Did you find that in terms of like performance reviews or kind of career progression, people find that this kind of internal education really valuable and are keen to kind of stick around because they feel like they're being invested in as a team?
I think I wouldn't want to make a sweeping generalization, but I do think that is well regarded and appreciated by a lot of our people, that there is an investment in supporting them in their careers. Some may well decide to move on, and sometimes they come back and rejoin us, which is great. But I do think it's appreciated, and it just makes good business sense, and it's nice to have a group of people working together who feel mutually supportive.
In terms of the leadership of Ryder, and say, for example, we started this conversation talking about your own journey to becoming a partner. And obviously being a partner in a firm is quite a unique position. It's not for everybody, but there are certainly maybe kind of core competencies of the partner of a business that you would expect to have, which are different from a kind of practicing architect or somebody who was in a solely project architect role. Could you talk a little bit about what do you think are some of those competencies that a partner of an architecture firm needs to have? And do you have, when you're kind of doing succession planning, do you have a similar sort of education for people becoming partners in the firm?
I mean, for many years, none of this was sort of written down, I suppose. But as we've grown, we've actually tried to describe what we feel are appropriate behaviours for people as they develop in the practice. And I'd like to think there's a common thread flows from everybody at, I suppose, assistant level right through to partner. I think a lot of it is about, it sounds like a cliche, but it's about a culture and a feeling of, I suppose, team working and collaboration between the members of the practice as a whole. And I suppose a partner's role is almost where those behaviours are probably should be at their absolute pinnacle is the wrong word, but where you represent those behaviors. It's about showing support and leadership, leading by example, being accountable, being ultimately responsible, for being accepting and acknowledging that the buck stops with you, and taking responsibility for maybe not the failures of others, but the shortcomings of others as well, and doing the right thing, I suppose. Now, we'd expect those behaviors to be exhibited, I suppose, by everyone, but at different degrees. There's values around enthusiasm and passion for our work. There's values we have as a practice around being forward-thinking and pioneering as well. And then I suppose the other value around mutual support and empowerment. Well, mutual support and empowerment, slightly different things, but allowing everybody think that they are empowered to do what is right for the practice and what is right for them in developing their career pathways. And I suppose I find that financial awareness as well, but not just looking at the bottom line and maximizing profit at the expense of everything else. It's about a balance. So I suppose the qualities are, I suppose those qualities exemplified in a particular at that level.
Do you have expectations with different abilities, say, for example, in the ability in being able to win work? Does that become a responsibility of the partner?
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, we did have a career pathway for many years, which it largely still applies, which is the pathway to being partner is about leadership of a team delivering projects, i.e. delivering design projects. And that involves winning work. We do have
right
resource involved in business development, obviously, and people involved in that, specializing in that role. But a lot of work winning is done through personal relationships of team leaders and partners in terms of. But we encourage others within teams who are maybe at a more junior level to be involved at the earliest stage. And this comes back to the empowerment thing of not feeling constrained, and if they want to explore opportunities in I suppose winning work and creating opportunities to do that, as long as it's within the context of our overall goals as a business. And so yes, there is a need to bring work in. There's a need to demonstrate leadership, to demonstrate that the profit that we said we were going to secure on a project is achieved, and if not, there's a reason why not. But recently, we've had a discussion around other pathways into that level of I suppose seniority through expertise and specialisms, other than necessarily being leading architectural projects in a team environment. But I do think that exhibiting a team working and a team leadership ethos is important. And also, as the practice has grown, we are looking at other ways of essentially democratizing the sense of ownership within the practice. And we have a performance-based profit share scheme for which the majority of everyone who's passed the probation period is eligible for as well. So
brilliant. Excellent. I think that's the perfect place to conclude the conversation there. Very inspiring insights and incredibly innovative what Ryder has doing. I wonder, certainly from my perspective, talking to a lot of architects, that just hearing the kind of innovations that you guys have had with training, and even that there's an education company, is very inspiring and quite unique, actually. So thank you very much, Peter, for sharing that expertise and those insights.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan.
And that's a wrap. Hey, Enoch Sears here, and I have a request. Since you are a listener here of the Business of Architecture podcast, Ryan and I, we love putting this podcast together. We love sharing information as much as we can glean from all the other industries that we're a part of to bring it back to empower you as an architect and a designer. And one thing that helps us in our mission is the growth of this podcast, simply because it helps other architects stand for more of their value, spreads the business information that we're sharing to empower architects together, so architects, designers, engineers can really step into their greatness, whatever that looks like for each individual. And so here my simple ask is for you to join us and be part of our community by doing the following: heading over to iTunes and leaving a review of the podcast. And as an expression of our sincere thanks, we would like to give you a free CEU course that can get you one professional development unit, but more importantly, we'll give you a very solid and firm foundation on your journey to becoming a profitable and thriving architect. So here's the process for that. After you leave us a review, send an email to support@businessofarchitecture.com. Let us know the username that you use to leave the review, and we will send you that free training. On the training, you'll discover what 99% of architecture firm owners wish they would have known 20 years ago.
Hello, listeners. We hope you're enjoying our show. We love bringing you these insightful conversations, but we couldn't do it without the support of our amazing sponsors. If you're a business owner or know someone who would be an excellent fit for our audience, we'd love to hear from you. Partnering with us means your brand will reach over 40,000 engaged listeners each month. Interested in becoming a sponsor? Please send us an email at support@businessofarchitecture.com. The views expressed on this show by my guests do not represent those of the host, and I make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract bond, or commitment except to help you be unstoppable.